Peace. MC Sean Love, or as they know me in the world of academia, Mr. Livinoche. Yeah, man, it's February and it's Black History Month, and what I've been toying with the idea of, like, back in December, I had to leave my full-time teaching job where I was tenured, so I could move across the country. But that being said, I am a certified teacher, not just of language arts, but I've also got a double. I can teach history, and that's official. Bonafide, certified, fortified, verified. And my credentials basically have the potential to transfer all over the country. Well, it's February and it's Black History Month, and a lot of people criticize that as like that's the shortest month of the year, but for a way to kick off this new YouTube video series, because as you see, I got plenty of series, whether it be reviews, whether it be beat making tutorials, whether it be my music, whether it be something referring to my high scores arcade. There's a lot of different little genres of video series that I got on my YouTube channel, and this one, to kick this off, it's going to be the Black History Deception. And, you know, no chalkboard, no rock in the wall. This is just going to be me kicking it for this first one. But I think it's important that if any of this information comes to you as a surprise, or if this sounds foreign to you, my advice to you would be to, especially when it comes to this set of knowledge, is for you to take your own notes, for you to go out and pursue it on your own. Because being a previously tenured teacher in the public school district and public school system, and also being involved in the private schools for years, I can tell you right off the top, when it comes to the history of civilization as, you know, the entire human family, or when it comes to Black history, you're not going to get what you need in a public or private institution unless you handpick that private institution, or if you're homeschooled. But generally what's available to you is just flat out bold-faced lies, which started out as a way to reinforce and to maintain white supremacy, but nowadays, you know, sometimes that's not always the agenda of an administrator or an instructor or even a superintendent. But the system of white supremacy and denying all Americans their right to get an honest view of civilization and Black history has been in place for so long that that sometimes keeping up the status quo, which may be definitely a motivation for some, isn't necessarily have to be the motivation for it to be in place, because it's been in place for so long, and the ideas that we've been taught have been taught for so long. It would take a whole revitalizing, a revolution of education in order to take them out of place. And so unfortunately, my advice to you as a teacher, as a certified teacher, is that if you want to know about Black history, if you want to know about the history of civilization, you're going to have to go and seek out that knowledge for yourself, because you're not going to be able to depend on a school system, especially a public school system, to give it to you. And that's not necessarily the fault of the administrators or the teachers, because I've worked with a lot of people that had the knowledge, or had at least pieces of the knowledge, but it wasn't part of the curriculum. And when you're an administrator, or when you're a superintendent, when you're a teacher, you're always working for the next person up, and it just hasn't reached it yet. And I'm not making excuses, because it's a horrific thing, but I'm just trying to state the reality that you're going to have to go out on your own, and you're going to have to seek that knowledge out for yourself. Whether you're Black, whether you're white, whether you're Puerto Rican, whether you're Costa Rican, whether you're Asian, Black history is human history. And without really having a clear view of Black history, you're not going to be able to really understand who you are. And especially if you're an American, in the context of American history, if you don't understand Black history or African history, at least in a general way, broad strokes, then you're missing out on a lot of your identity. And I don't care if you're an Asian American from Japan, or if you're a European American that's been here for 5 generations, or if you're an African American whose family's been here since 1555. These are not things that you're going to get handed to you on a platter. Maybe it should be, but it's not. Okay, moving forward, I want to talk about some of the reasons for racism when it comes to teaching Black history, or African history, or African American history, any way you look at it, you're talking about the history of the African, the original people on the planet Earth. And you're talking about a lot of times when you're learning African American history, the focus is put on the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X is glossed over, Elijah Muhammad is ignored, Marcus Garvey is barely even sprinkled in the Pan-African movement. So what you're going to do here is you're going to see a lot of things that really have their own abstract implications when you learn about them. So if you're a white or Black student or Asian student and you're learning Black history, first you're learning that Columbus discovered America, you're learning all these different achievements of Europeans, and then when it comes to Black History Month, you're learning things like Black people invented peanut butter. You know, with all due respect to George Washington Carver, relative to all the achievements and all the things that you're reading about and that you're being fed that come from Europe, you're learning very, very little about the history of Africa, and a lot of it is made cloudy. Like, for example, if you look at Egypt, one of the most successful civilizations, period, there's always a cloudiness about were they Europeans, were they Africans, were they half black, half white. There's always a need to separate Egypt from Africa. Just because it's in the northeast, well, that's not part of Africa, but it is. And there's evidence where you see a lot of times archaeologists, Europeans that came through and actually doctored up and changed the hieroglyphs and changed the pictures to make the Egyptians appear less black. You can look this stuff up. What I would urge you to do is just look at the face of the Great Sphinx of Giza, because if you look at the face of the Great Sphinx of Giza, there's no doubt in your mind that you're looking at a black African, which I pointed out in my video when I visited Egypt myself. If you look at other parts of Africa too, I mean, if you look at something like the Ivory Coast, and you're going to see an entirely developed city, but when you watch the news, you're going to see nothing but people that are living a jungle way of life, or you're going to see the famine, or you're going to see the AIDS crisis, but you're not necessarily going to see what Africa as a continent has to offer. You're not going to see the resources, and you're not going to be explained why those resources that are in that continent don't add up to wealth. Because you've got oil, you've got gold, you've got diamonds, and you've also got extreme poverty, you've got the AIDS crisis, and you've got an overall general media impression that Africa is basically like a wasteland and a jungle. And so what does that tell a person who is somewhat, at least remotely aware that their heritage, their genetic lineage is from Africa? What's the reason for this racism? How come when you're in school you're taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America, when there's evidence, there's absolute positive evidence that Africans were going back and forth from the Americas and back to Africa, back and forth, at least 5, maybe 10,000 years before Columbus showed up? When you look at the indigenous people in the Americas, especially on the West Coast, you're going to see people that have African features. If you look at the if you look at some of the monuments that they found in Mexico and places in South America, you're going to see monuments that were evidences of civilizations that existed thousands of years before, that were undoubtedly civilizations where their statues had African features. One thing, if you want to look at recent racism over the last 500 years in the Americas, you're going to be looking at a situation where you had free labor. So, people hear about the Civil War, and they hear about how the Civil War is what freed the Africans from bondage. But there's a lot of, half-truths to that. Because if you look at the economics of the Civil War, Lincoln, he's the hero that freed the Africans from bondage. But the intent there, the true intent there, the South is getting rich, because they don't have to pay anybody to do their work, and they can pay somebody once and then have a laborer for life. And so the wealth that the South is amassing and the North not amassing that much wealth, that throws off the American capitalist system. All right? So now you've got the South and the North that are at odds together, that are no longer one United States, and that problem had to be solved. It just so happens a byproduct of that problem being solved was the emancipation of the Africans. And notice that I didn't say slaves. Lincoln did. So if you look at what Lincoln said, I free the slaves. But he's basically saying that you were a slave, your father was a slave, your son's going to be a slave, and I free you. It doesn't say I free the Africans. There's a lot of evidence for racism, not only in American history, but if you look before American history, if you look at the Dutch slave trade, there's had to be a clear-cut reason to not only enslave somebody's body, but in order to convince an entire group of people or a shade of people that they were intellectually inferior to their white counterparts. The lessons that I studied, if you look at the 1 to 10, if you look at the 3rd and 4th of the understanding and the culture degree in the 1 to 10 student enrollment, it says, what is the total population of the original nation here in the wilderness of North America and all over the planet Earth? The total population of the original nation here in the wilderness of North America is 17 million, with 2 million Indians making it a total of 19 million. So that's 19 million people that were considered black in this country, and that's from around 1930 when that was assessed. And what's the total population of the colored people, or white people, in the wilderness of North America and all over the planet Earth? Total population of the colored people here in the wilderness of North America is 103 million. All over the planet Earth is 400 million. So when you look at numbers like 400 million and 4,400,000,000, you're seeing that on the planet Earth, you've got an extreme imbalance of white people versus non-white people. So on the planet, the non-white people outweighed the white people 1 to 10. All right, so you've got 10%, you got 90% non-whites and 10% whites on the entire planet. So if you're a group of people that has recessive genetics, and this is not an insult, but if you take a black person and a white person and you put them together and you produce a baby, then that baby is a dark-skinned baby. That baby, and if you move further down the genetic line and you infuse more dark skin or people with melanin into that bloodline or not, the folks with the dark skin are going to be dominant in terms of genetics. So that says that there's a huge threat on the planet to that 10% of people on the entire planet that are white, that are not dark skinned people. And we're talking about over a long period of time, genetic annihilation. So if there was ever a reason to keep an entire group of people down or convince them that they were intellectually inferior, genetic annihilation would definitely be one of them. And we're talking about science, so it's just like you take the personal feelings out of this and you look deeper into what the truth is about the way that American history is played out or world history is played out over the last couple thousand years, and things start to make a little bit more sense to you. And one thing that helped motivate me when I was a teenager was to bomb the teacher. It's called bomb the teacher. When you drop a bomb, everything changes. You know, you got to start from scratch. So if you can actually go to a library and you can and go on the internet these days and you start doing some research and you find out what you should be reading, and then you read a few things, you absorb a few things, and make it your object to bomb the teacher. Your objective should be bomb the teacher. So you go to class, you raise your hand, and you know, sometimes it doesn't work out for the best, but in 2013, you can go into a classroom, and if you know a little bit more than the teacher, and I've worked in the inner city, I've worked outside the inner city, if you know more than the teacher, 9 times out of 10, they're walking on eggshells a little bit, so they're going to have to answer a little bit to your statements or to your questions, and if they don't know the answer, you know, you're going to be faced with a situation where you've become a teacher in a sense, because you've sparked a dialogue in the classroom and you've brought something out that necessarily wasn't going to be in there unless you spoke first. So you've become the teacher in a sense. So you know, if you're not at the age of being a student, I mean, there's plenty of resources for you to find out this information. And this all ties into why the diffusion of hip-hop music and culture is so detrimental to the youth in America, because I mean, a lot of times, you know, the initiation of a lot of young people back in the 80s and even 90s was into this type of knowledge was through hip-hop. I mean, the first time I heard about fluoride affecting you negatively was in a Mobb Deep record, was in a Prodigy record, and from that magnet of knowledge, it attracted other knowledge. So now I can tell you that fluoride affects and calcifies the pineal gland in the head. I can also tell you that the pineal gland in your head, they're different between Europeans and Africans, and they started discovering that back in the 60s after the Vietnam War, when they were starting to dissect these bodies, and they would look at the pineal gland in the head, which controls so much about the brain function and the nervous system, and see, and when you look at different things like KRS-One from the 1980s and stuff, you must learn. He was spitting out different things that not all of us understood as kids, but later on as adults, it initiated us into a body of knowledge that wasn't easily available to us. And that initiation process in hip-hop today is almost non-existent. So you're going to be dealing with a generation of people that are not exposed to these ideas. They're not exposed to the idea that fluoride that you put on the brush for your teeth, the Prodigy said, they're not initiated through that statement. So they may never learn that the pineal gland was something that was widely revered in ancient Egypt, and it ties into a huge body of understanding in prior ancient knowledge. So when you're looking at culture in this country right now, there's not a lot of pathways to good knowledge or knowledge about civilization, knowledge about history. You're looking at things that were obviously manipulated throughout history. When you look at how the King James Bible was constructed and the way it was constructed, how and why and with what power, and you see the influence that's had over the world, you start seeing things a little bit differently, and you start understanding that the big picture you're looking at has been hung by somebody, right? And that person that hung that picture might not have had your best interest in mind. So this kind of journey, I mean, there's obviously other like-minded people out there that you can find, but the journey of really obtaining knowledge is a journey that requires your willingness, but it also requires, you know, your ambition, because truth isn't really, you know, it's there, it's easy to find, but it's not necessarily easy to decipher, because you got to get through a lot of snow. You got to shovel through a lot of snow to get to the cabin. You've got to try to, you know, to be able to figure out what's real and what isn't real. one of the best things you can do to try to understand if you're being taught the truth or not is to look for the origin point of that information and find out where it came from and who wrote it and what sources they used. Because if you can't prove something beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's really not good advice that I could give you or any educator could give you to really bank on it. You know what I mean? So when you're dealing with truth and when you want to understand, when you want to develop a worldview that isn't designed to destroy you, the best thing that you can do is be careful and try to figure out what you're reading, where it came from. And just for the record, what these old white dudes did is not good for any of us. It's certainly not good for African Americans. It's certainly not good for Africans. I mean, I've got African students that come in from another country and they come to America 3 years and they're testing through the roof with these standardized tests. And then if you look at the data, you're going to see that different minority, quote unquote, minority groups like Africans, Hispanics aren't testing as well as whites and Asians. But if you get somebody that comes from Africa, they're blowing them all out the water. All right. So why is the testing reflect this? What does IQ stand for? What does that mean? What does that tell us about a person's intelligence? Now, you might not know that off the top of your head, but what you can know is where did the IQ test even come from? And if you do the research, you're going to see that the way that the IQ, the intelligence quotients test, was developed with a racist agenda. When you're looking at the way that this country is set up, you can't take for granted that you're being given the truth or that you're being given something that's beneficial to you. You probably be given something. If it's a remnant of this country and the way that this country was founded, then you're probably being given something that at least has the dirt on it of a racist agenda. And if you're learning and you're shaping your mind or your child's mind that's with an idea or with a concept or with a system that's ridden with the dirt of a racist agenda, you're not going to be coming anywhere near the truth. The current state of the way we see history and the current state of the way that we're taught history absolutely positively has white supremacy at the core of it. And why should I care? Why should somebody that can pass for white or looks white care about that? Well, the reason is truth, whether it's convenient for you or convenient for me or not. So if you want to see reality, if you want to see the way that history is unfolded and who you are, your best bet is to look at reality with open-minded, clear eyes and try to seek it out, whether or not it disappoints you or says something about you that you might not want said. The wind was at my back before when they were saying this, but now that I'm finding out this and this and this is true, you know what? I'm going to turn my back and I'm going to go down the path of least resistance because this is easy and more beneficial for me. And there's like a lot of things that confuse you. It's called the art of misdirection. Magicians used it. So like when they find a statue that has African features, they're going to come out and say, well, this might be aliens, and is that an alien helmet or this or that? They'll do anything. They'll do anything to cling to the worldview that is putting certain people into power and has maintained the status quo. But the status quo, if you look at the way that the world is functioning, you look at the way that our spirituality is functioning, if you look at the way that our relations, our race relations, and just social relations in general are functioning, the status quo isn't working for us. So you're going to have to do a lot of the research on your own, whether you like it or not, whether that seems fair or not. And I beckon y'all, if y'all want to check it out, you can definitely go to my web resources. You can check out my Google search terms. Do that carefully. Remember, you don't know what you're going to be getting when you Google something. And definitely check out some of the books. If y'all got any questions, feel free to hit me up. And I'll be doing more Bomb the Teacher videos soon. I'm going to be switching up the pace and going back to like language arts and how you can pass these tests and what some of the four core fundamental skills are that you're going to need. It worked for me. It can work for you. Peace, y'all.